So thanks very much for having me this afternoon. What I'd like to do is talk today a little bit about community media projects, the importance of community media, and provide some suggestions for how we might improve media projects based in the community. And these are coming out of two projects that I've been working on recently. One is a project that comes out of Tent City 4 here in King County, working with homeless individuals. And then another is a project coming up this summer that's based in Cape Town, South Africa, working with young activists around the hosting of the World Cup in South Africa this summer. I'm really pleased, I have to say, to be following Fiona and David. I think you'll see a lot of similarities in what we're saying today, but you're sort of seeing the other side of the information economy. So when they're talking about information poverty and the lack of accessing information, I'm looking here at the issues around being able to produce media and generate information from the other side as well. Now, community media has a very long history and a contentious one at that. And much of that contention centers around definitions, which is nothing unusual. But I'd like to offer a provisional definition today, just to work with this afternoon. That definition is that community media projects put media production into the hands of those who don't normally have a chance to make their own media. Now, let me say that again. Community media projects put media production in the hands of those who don't normally have a chance to make media themselves. Now, before I move on, let me make two observations about this definition and what's important in that definition. The first is that community is defined very loosely. That can be a community that's defined geographically. It can be media making that happens in a neighborhood, Greenwood, Crown Hill, South Park, wherever it may be. Or it can be a community that operates transnationally. We saw this morning in the first presentation by Scott, the sense of a hip-hop community that's operating across transatlantic borders, but still has that sense of community operating through media. We also have a fantastic organization here in Seattle called Real Girls that works with teenage girls to make their own media. So all of these can fall into the category of community media. Second, this definition specifies that community media projects privilege communities that are normally marginalized in other parts of life, right? So the emphasis is this idea that you don't normally have a chance to make media, and that these are the specific communities that community media takes seriously. Now, why does this matter? Because this is what makes these projects important. It matters because in an increasingly mediated world, and particularly in a world where media production, as well as consumption, is spreading much more broadly and being disseminated much more broadly, if you're being left behind by the trends in participatory media, you're becoming very vulnerable. You're vulnerable to dropping through social and economic gaps that provide opportunity. You're vulnerable to stereotyping, which makes it very easy to then be scapegoated after that. You're vulnerable to a widening digital divide. And digital divide is a term that has really fallen out of vogue recently, even as that divide has actually increased in the past several years. You're also vulnerable to political marginalization and political erasure. And ultimately, it makes all of us vulnerable to the possibility that democracy cannot fulfill its promise. Because if we can't include marginalized communities in our increasingly diverse, digitized media world, then those communities will be outside the inclusion of democracy, and it has a real impact on our discussions. So before I go any further, I'd like to show a brief clip from a film that was made as part of a collaboration between a group of students at the University of Washington and the residents of Tent City 4. For those of you who aren't familiar with the tent cities, here in King County, these are mobile homeless encampments that have to move every 3 months to new locations. They're also completely self-governed. If you're interested in direct democracy in action, there's no better place to see it than in the weekly meetings of the community at Tent Cities. So what we did was this project grew out of many years of work that began when a new tent city 4, was proposed for the north side and the east side of the Seattle metropolitan area. Now, this new tent city was proposed to be in Bothell, which is where UW-Bothell is located, of course. And what we found was that there was intense resistance among some members of the community. So I had a student who deserves a shout out here. Her name's Jacqueline Lersch, who wrote her senior thesis on the discourses of resistance to tent city at the time. That thesis eventually was published. And several years, over the course of several years, UW-Bothell students were working with residents of Tent City 4 to develop all sorts of different kinds of collaborations. Now fast forward to 2007 and the University of Washington's Summer Institute in the Arts and Humanities. During this Summer Institute in the Arts and Humanities, there were 6 UW students, extremely talented students, who spent the entire summer working with residents of Tent City 4 in order to produce this film that you're about to see a short clip of, as well as an art installation. And these were based on the themes of neighbor, community, and home. So this is the first minute of that film.
You know, we just, I mean, we're basically
a lot of the other shelters in downtown, you know.
What are we going to do now? Luckily, that was around the time
right here, you know, we have lots of...
My concern is this. I don't know what brought these people to be homeless, but I know that it probably wasn't just one bad decision. There was probably a string of bad decisions that got them to this position. And this position, I feel very sorry for them. But my feeling is this. What happens if they have a bad day at work? They lose their job. They make some bad decisions because they're angry. Maybe they relapse. Maybe they, I don't know. I just don't want a bad decision to happen in my neighborhood with a lot of little children there. I have a very young daughter.
I realize it can be a little distracting to have talking heads speaking behind me and not be able to hear what they're saying. But I'm doing this to make 2 different points. One which I'll address immediately, and another one which I'll come back to at the end of the talk, which is talking about the aesthetics of community media and the importance of thinking through those aesthetics. But first I want to address the question of collaboration. What I want to emphasize is that the students involved in this project expressly did not want to make a documentary film about Tent City. The subject of the film is not Tent City itself. The subject is asking the question, what does it mean to be a neighbor? What does it mean to be a community? And what does it mean to have a home? So this is a project that was built specifically in collaboration between the residents of Tent City and the UW students. And the success or failure of this project builds off of that question of collaboration. So I'd like to propose collaboration as the first of 3 keywords that we need to think about in order to move community media projects forward. As with the Tent City project, collaboration is a key concept in the My World Cup project that I'm directing. This project will pair UW students with young South African activists this summer in Cape Town during the hosting of the World Cup in South Africa. Each pair will produce a short film, and we're calling these films, we've just made up this genre on our own, we're calling them community journals. And the idea is that the community journals will provide a glimpse into what life is like for the young South Africans during the hosting of the World Cup. A glimpse that goes beyond the hype and the sensationalism of mainstream media accounts of the Cup, and that includes questions of dispossession, but also excitement, and joy, but also struggle. Now, in order to accomplish this project, My World Cup is a partnership between several organizations: 911 Seattle Media Arts Center, the Seattle Sounders Football Club, Cape Town Community Television, and several units of the University of Washington, including the new Digital Media Lab at UW-Bothell, which is run by Angelica Macklin. All of these partnerships, which represent significant investments of time and resources, are focused on strengthening the on-the-ground collaboration between the UW students and the South African activists. After collaboration, I want to recommend that the second keyword we think about in terms of community media is sustainability. Now, sustainability is one of those words that everyone uses and we're all tired of, right? I recognize that it's become almost vacated of meaning, but I still think it's important to use in this setting, and that's because sustainability asks a key question about community media, and that is, how do we think about appropriate technologies in the same way that David and Fiona were just talking about when we engage in community media projects? Even in South Africa, the most connected and wired nation on the continent, and even in Cape Town, which is the most connected and wired city in that nation on that continent. Cape Town Community Television still relies on 2 personal computers of their staff to do almost all the editing for the entire channel. The communities that Cape Town Community Television primarily works with are marginalized communities in the townships that have little or no access to the kinds of social technologies we're talking about today, many of those technologies at least. And even in Seattle, where we have admirable projects going on with an excellent public library system, private foundations working on access to social technologies, residents of Tent City 4 still have a far more difficult time accessing these technologies than you might suspect. So this brings me to the title of the talk, Beyond the Bright, Shiny New Thing. And I realized, as I was sitting in the audience earlier, that there are a lot of bright, shiny new things in this audience right now. So I want to emphasize that the title is not against the bright, shiny new thing. Rather, it's beyond the bright, shiny new thing. And what I want to suggest here is that we need to take seriously the questions of who does not have access to the new innovations. And we need to resist the temptation to focus solely on the newest technology, the newest platform, the hottest, hippest, most exciting innovation, and think about what that impact is for those who get left behind from those innovations. Sometimes we even think that, well, it's inevitably going to spread, right? It's sort of a fact of life that eventually these innovations will spread to everyone. It's simply not true. Or even worse, we think that the technologies themselves are going to solve the inequalities of the world. So these are questions that we need to stay attuned to. My final keyword, and this is perhaps the hardest one to work with, is that of education. We've made great strides in media literacy over the past several decades, but there's a lot of work to be done. And this is spurred primarily by the shift towards greater access to media production. If media literacy continues to focus only on questions of deconstructing media content, we'll be stuck in old modes of production, and we'll forget the fact that the vast majority of folks in the States actually are gaining access to the means of production. If that's not part of our media literacy curriculum, we're missing out on a major piece. The second thing I want to emphasize within that is that we need to rethink what it means to have good aesthetics in community media. This is one of the biggest critiques of community media, is that the media they produce is subpar. I want to argue that on the contrary, the question is the quality of the collaboration. If that collaboration goes south, and it certainly does sometimes, then the media result is going to be subpar as well. But if we are to recognize community media projects when they're successful, we need to rethink genres, and we need to rethink what we believe good, high-quality media should look like. That's why I've left the talking heads moving silently behind me during this talk. The choice to use this mode was an active choice on the part of the filmmakers, the residents of Tent City and the students at University of Washington. It wasn't a choice that was made out of a lack of sophistication. It wasn't just a bad aesthetic choice to have these talking heads for long periods of time. It was an active choice to say, we're going to use this classic documentary shot of the talking head, but we're going to use very long takes. And those long takes are going to honor the stories of home and community and neighbor that are being told, sometimes in the very tent that has become a home in this project. So in conclusion, let me just acknowledge that these 3 keywords I'm focusing on, education, collaboration, and sustainability, are hardly the bright, shiny new keywords of the future, right? Almost any project you could say, absolutely, yes, yes, we need to focus on these 3 things. But I think that they remain the crux of our work as we move forward in community media practice. Because if we want to actually use social technologies to improve our communities, including those who get left behind when we sort of glamorize the bright, new, shiny thing, then we need to keep these keywords in mind as we move forward, not only in community media, but in democracy itself. Thank you very much.